The cold pre-dawn air over the remote desert training facility carried the familiar scent of sagebrush and cordite. For the team of Navy SEALs huddled in the makeshift operations tent, it was the smell of work. They were in the middle of a live-fire exercise, a final validation before a high-stakes deployment. Inside the tent, the atmosphere was tense, focused. Commander Jane Reynolds stood apart from the small cluster of men, her gaze fixed on the digital display, showing the feed from a long-range observation drone. At 42, with 20 years of service behind her, Jane was an anomaly, a woman who had not only survived but thrived in the most intense combat leadership roles the Navy had to offer. She commanded respect not through volume, but through an almost unnerving calm and a track record of making the right call when it mattered most. The exercise was designed to be a near impossible feat. The target was a simulated enemy mortar position set up on a ridge nearly 2 miles away at a distance of 3,247 meters. At that range, the Earth's curvature becomes a factor. The wind, temperature, and air pressure can vary wildly between the firing position and the target. It was a shot that pushed the very limits of the weapon systems and the men pulling the triggers. For the past hour, two of her best snipers had been trading off, their faces masks of concentration as they made micro-adjustments to their Barrett M82, a 1.50 caliber rifles. The massive guns designed to destroy hardened targets like trucks and bunkers, kicked with a ferocious recoil. Was the sound of their report a deep, physical thump that vibrated in the chests of everyone nearby. Shot after shot echoed across the basin. On the screen, they could see the puffs of dust, but they were always short or wide or just off. The spotters, using high-powered optics and wind sensors, would call out corrections. The snipers would adjust their elevation and windage knobs with meticulous precision. Another deep thump, another miss. Frustration was a tangible presence in the tent, a low hum of muttered curses and heavy sighs. Jane watched her men, seeing the fatigue setting in. The physical toll of firing a .50 caliber is immense, and the mental toll of failure was beginning to show in the set of their shoulders. Senior Chief Miller, the team leader, walked over to her, his face drawn. "Ma'am, the wind shear up there is a monster. The data we're getting is lagging. It's like trying to hit a flea on a running dog from the next county. We might need to call it and move the asset closer for the next iteration." Jane nodded, her eyes not leaving the drone feed. She understood the logic. It was the prudent, tactical call, but something about it didn't sit right. They were about to deploy to a place where the enemy didn't move their assets closer to make the shot easier. She looked from the screen to the massive rifle resting on its bipod, its long barrel still shimmering with heat haze from the last round. She had qualified on the .50 caliber years ago, but as a commander, her place was in the Tactical Operations Center, not behind the trigger. Her job was to lead, not to do. "Give me the data one more time, Senior," she said quietly. The Miller rattled off the numbers. Distance, wind speed at the shooter and at the target, direction, air density, Coriolis effect. He recited them from memory, a litany of reasons why the shot was all but impossible today. Jane walked over to the firing position. The sniper, a young man named Larson with a reputation for being the best shot in the platoon, looked up at her. His eyes were red-rimmed from staring through the scope. "Ma'am, I'm just not getting the purchase I need. The Mirage is dancing all over the place." She put a hand on his shoulder. "Stand down for a minute, Larson. Take a break." She then looked at Miller. "I'm going to take a look through the glass." There was a slight pause. It was unusual for the commander to step into the shooter's position, but no one questioned her. Jane knelt behind the Barrett, with the cold desert sand immediately soaking through the knee of her uniform. The rifle's stock felt alien in her hands, a tool she had instructed others on, but hadn't personally wielded in a serious capacity in nearly a decade. She leaned into the scope. The world snapped into a magnified, shimmering view. Miller was right. The heat waves rising from the desert floor warped the image of the distant ridge, making the target, a silhouetted metal plate, waver and swim like a mirage. She pulled back, taking a deep breath of the dry air. She closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the noise of the tent, the low murmur of the men, the hum of the generators. She wasn't thinking about tactics or the deployment or the politics of her position. She thought about the round, the physics of it, the arc it would have to travel. She climbing miles into the air before plunging down at a terminal velocity that could punch through inches of steel. She visualized the line, a clean, perfect curve through the chaos of the atmosphere. Opening her eyes, she settled back behind the scope. Her right hand found the grip, her index finger resting lightly on the trigger. Her left hand adjusted the elevation knob, dialing in the data, but then adding a tiny, intuitive click more based on nothing but a feeling in her gut. The crosshairs danced with the mirage. She didn't try to fight it, to hold them perfectly still. Instead, she watched the rhythm of the dance, waiting for the moment the crosshairs drifted across the point she knew the target would be. The tension in the tent spiked. Everyone had stopped what they were doing to watch their commander. This wasn't protocol, and this wasn't right. If she missed, it would be awkward. If she somehow managed to hit, it would be a miracle. Jane Reynolds was oblivious to them. She was in a world that consisted only of her, the rifle, and the target over the horizon. She tracked the mirage, her breathing slow and even. In the space between heartbeats, as the crosshairs swept across her intended point of impact, she began the trigger squeeze. The thunder was deafening. The massive Barrett lurched against her shoulder with a brutal kick that would leave a bruise the size of a dinner plate. The muzzle blast kicked up a massive cloud of dust, momentarily blinding the spotter's optics. For a full 5 seconds, there was silence in the tent. The dust began to clear. Everyone stared at the drone feed. Then the spotter, his voice cracking with disbelief, shouted, "Ah, splash, direct hit, target destroyed." A collective gasp went through the tent, followed by a dead silence. Men looked at each other, then at the feed, then at the small figure of their commander kneeling behind the smoking rifle. They saw her shoulders rise and fall with a deep, controlled breath. She slowly stood up, the desert sand falling from her fatigues. She didn't pump her fist. She didn't smile. She just looked at the drone feed for a long moment, a strange, distant look in her eyes. "Good. Log the data and prep the target for the next iteration," she said, her voice calm and steady. She walked away from the rifle, back toward the planning table, as if she had just done nothing more than sign a requisition form. But inside, a storm was raging. The impact she felt wasn't just the recoil of the rifle. It was the realization of what she had just done. The numbers replayed in her head. 3,247 meters, over 2 miles. The longest confirmed kill in history was just over 3,500 meters, a record held by a Canadian sniper. She had just casually, in a moment of frustrated instinct, dropped a round onto a target at a range that was only a few football fields short of that world record. She had outperformed her two best snipers, men who did this for a living, using only her training, her gut, and a decade-old memory of what the trigger felt like. For the next hour, as the exercise continued with a newly invigorated and slightly awestruck team, Jane went through the motions. She gave orders, checked positions, and analyzed data. But her mind was elsewhere. She kept feeling the vibration of the stock in her shoulder, hearing the unique report of the round leaving the barrel. It was a feeling she had suppressed for years, the pure, singular focus of being the shooter, not the commander. It was a siren song she had long ago learned to ignore. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the team packed up their gear. Senior Chief Miller walked up to her, holding a tablet. "Ma'am, the telemetry from your shot came through. We ran it through the ballistics software again, cross-referencing it with the drone's atmospheric data from the exact moment of fire." He paused, handing her the tablet. "It's confirmed. The dope, data on previous engagement, is solid. That was a 1 in a million shot, Commander." Jane looked at the screen, the numbers a cold, hard confirmation of what she already knew. She handed the tablet back. "Thank you, Senior. Make sure the team gets some rest. We have a long flight tomorrow." That night, lying on a cot in the austere desert camp, Jane stared at the canvas ceiling. She couldn't escape the echo of the shot. It felt like a door opening in her mind, a door she had deliberately sealed shut years ago. She thought back to her early days in the service, a young woman constantly having to prove she was more than a set of expectations. She had loved the feeling of mastering a weapon, the quiet confidence of knowing she could do her job better than anyone. But as she climbed the ranks, that personal mastery had to be sacrificed for leadership. A commander's job was to enable the skills of others, not to showcase their own. But tonight, the suppressed part of her was whispering. It wasn't just about the distance. It was the act. The simplicity of the equation. Target, skill, result. For the first time in years, she missed it. She missed the clean, uncomplicated purpose of being a sniper. The next morning, as the C-17 transport plane lifted off from the desert strip, Jane looked out the window at the receding landscape. She knew that shot would follow her. It would be talked about in the teams for years to come. Remember that time Commander Reynolds stepped up and outshot everyone? It was a good story, one that added a layer of mystique to her already formidable reputation. But for her, it was a private revelation. Back at their home base in Virginia Beach, the story did indeed spread. It started as a quiet rumor and grew into a legend. At the team's next formal gathering, a decorated admiral approached her. He had a broad smile on his face. "Jane, I heard you've been poaching your own snipers' jobs. Hell of a shot, hell of a shot." He clapped her on the shoulder. Men from her team looked on with a renewed sense of respect, their commander now a living, breathing example of the standards she held them to. Weeks later, they were deployed. The theater was hostile, the missions constant. Jane threw herself into the work, into the 20-hour days of planning, briefing, and debriefing. The memory of the desert shot faded into the background, buried under the weight of operational security and the responsibility for her people's lives. They were hunting a high-value target, a facilitator who moved between safe houses with impunity. Intelligence was spotty, windows of opportunity were measured in seconds. They had been tracking a convoy for hours, hoping for a clear shot opportunity. It finally came at a remote crossroads. A SEAL sniper team was in position on a hillside, hidden in the scrub. They had the primary vehicle in their scope. The order to engage came from Jane, sitting in the Joint Operations Center hundreds of miles away, watching the same feed they were. The sniper's voice came over the net, calm and professional. "Target acquired, standing by." "Take the shot," Jane ordered. The feed showed the vehicle stop. A man got out. The crosshairs settled on him. The sniper squeezed the trigger. A miss. The man scrambled, diving back into the vehicle as the snipers tried to reacquire. The convoy sped off, disappearing into the labyrinthine streets of a nearby village. The mission was a failure. In the aftermath, the debrief was brutal but professional. The sniper, a different shooter from the one in the desert, was distraught. "Commander, I don't know what happened. The data was solid. I did everything right. It just wasn't there." Jane looked at the playback, frame by frame. She saw the shot, saw the dust kick up just behind the target. A miss by inches. It was the difference between life and death. It was the nature of their business. She consoled the young man, reassured him, and focused on the next opportunity. But that night, alone in her quarters, the ghost of that desert shot returned. It haunted her, not with pride, but with a profound and terrible what if. What if she had been there? What if she had been the one behind the rifle? Could she have made the shot? She replayed the data from the failed mission in her head, comparing it to the data from her impossible shot. Once the distances were shorter, the conditions less extreme. Logically, the sniper should have made it, but logic didn't bring the target down. A terrifying, seductive thought began to take root. She had a gift, a rare, undeniable gift. She had proven it to herself under the most impossible conditions. She was a commander, a leader of warriors. But at her core, was she denying what she truly was, a warrior herself? The conflict was agonizing. Her duty was clear, to lead from the front, yes, but also from the command post, to see the bigger picture, to manage the battle, not to fight it. To step down from that role to be a shooter would be seen as a dereliction of duty, a narcissistic pursuit of personal glory over the safety and success of her team. The pressure mounted as the deployment continued. They had more close calls, sending more near misses. Every time a shot was fired and the target walked away, she felt the failure in her own bones. The team sensed her intensity, her laser focus during planning. They interpreted it as the drive of a hard-charging commander. They didn't know she was fighting a private war with herself. One evening, after another failed attempt, she found herself in the small makeshift gym in the forward operating base, pounding a heavy bag until her knuckles were raw and bleeding. Senior Chief Miller walked in and stood watching her for a while. He didn't say anything, just waited. Finally, she stopped, breathing heavily, her fists dripping. "You want to talk about it, Commander?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, this man who had been by her side for years, who had watched her back and she his. He was the only person she could even consider being honest with. She unwrapped her hand, the sting of the torn skin, a welcome distraction. "That shot in the desert, Senior. You think it was luck?" Miller shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am, I don't. I think it was skill. Skill you don't get to use anymore." His words were a mirror to her soul. He understood. He saw the conflict. "The men trust you, Commander," he continued. "They trust you because they know you'd never ask them to do something you couldn't or wouldn't do yourself. And you proved that in the desert. That shot, it wasn't just a good story, it was a statement. It told every one of them that the person giving the orders knows exactly what those orders cost. It's a different kind of weapon, ma'am. It's the weapon of leadership." Jane stood there, the sweat cooling on her skin. Miller's words didn't extinguish the fire, but they gave it a different fuel. He was right. Her place wasn't on the rifle, but her skill could still serve the mission. It served it by forging an unbreakable bond of trust. She didn't need to be the shooter to be the warrior. Her gift was the ability to understand, to feel what her shooters felt, and that understanding made her a better commander. The next day, a new piece of intelligence came in. The target was located. The window was narrow. Jane formulated the plan, using every ounce of her tactical knowledge. She positioned her snipers with precision, accounting for every variable she could think of. As the snipers moved into position, she got on the net. Her voice was calm, clear. "All right, listen up. This is it. I know what you're facing. I know the pressure. I've felt that trigger under my finger. Forget the data for a second. Trust your gut. Trust your eye. When you see the target, you'll know. The rifle is just an extension of you. Be the bullet." The sniper from the failed mission, the one who had missed, was in position. He took a deep breath. The target emerged. He tracked him. The crosshairs settled. He squeezed. "Target down. Target is down. Confirmed kill." The net erupted with quiet, triumphant confirmations. In the JOC, Jane let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She closed her eyes for a brief second, a wave of relief and pride washing over her. It wasn't her finger on the trigger, but it was her shot. It was her leadership, her training, her understanding that had put that bullet on target. She looked at the frozen frame of the drone feed, showing the target neutralized. The ghost of the desert shot finally settled. It would always be a part of her, a reminder of the warrior inside. But it was no longer a siren's call to abandon her post. It was a foundation stone. It was the bedrock of her credibility. She was Commander Jane Reynolds, and she had just led her team to a victory that would save countless lives. Months later, back home, she stood on the range with her team for a routine qualification. The Barrett .50 caliber was set up. Larson, the young sniper from the desert, looked at her with a grin. "Hey, Commander, want to show us how it's done again?" Jane looked at the rifle, then at her team. They were her family, her purpose. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "No, Larson, that's your job. I've got mine." She walked over to the observation point, picked up her binoculars, and settled in to watch her men do what they did best. And in that moment, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The stunned silence of the desert was replaced by the steady, comforting rhythm of her team's rifles. A symphony she had orchestrated, and a legacy she was building, one round at a time.